Hey guys, I'm Nisha Homi and today I'm sharing how to ferment chilies. Fermented jalapenos are a great way to use and preserve them. Fermentation process transforms the vegetables into a healthy lacto fermented food with beneficial probiotics. So let's get started with the recipe. To make lacto fermented green chilies, today I'm using jalapenos. So I got 350 grams of jalapenos. Now instead of the variety of chilies I'm using, you can use ordinary green chilies as well. I have already washed and rinsed the jalapenos and dried them with a clean cotton napkin. And now I'm going to slice each of the chilies. So first I'll be removing the stem part and then I'm slicing the chilies. Now when you're fermenting, always make sure that your hands are clean and dry. If you're not used to handling very hot chilies or peppers, please use a gloves. Now a word about the spiciness of the chilies. Jalapeno chilies are slightly spicy. Lacto fermented chilies are great in salads and chutneys. The rich beneficial bacteria preserve the food, hence fermenting vegetables are a good way of preserving them. Lacto fermentation also helps to maintain a healthy microbiome. Natural fermentation takes about 3 to 7 days, mostly depending on the climate of the place you live in. For me here in Kerala, it gets ready in about 3 to 5 days. Fermentation relies on the naturally occurring bacteria or yeast present in the vegetable. The microorganisms consume the sugar in the food and produce lactic acid, and as a byproduct creates an environment that is inhospitable to harmful bacteria. The metabolic activity of the microorganisms during fermentation creates the characteristic tangy, sour or umami flavors found in fermented foods. Hence, fermented foods like sauerkraut or lacto-fermented vegetables or fruits will have a slightly sour or tangy flavor. I like to ferment between 3 to 5 days. Maybe on the 4th or 5th day, I give a small taste test, and if it is having the sourness or tangy flavor to my likeness, I immediately stop fermentation at room temperature and transfer to the refrigerator, where it will stay good for many months. So always try to taste test after 3rd day. And once it has the sourness or tangy flavor of your preference, you can shift it to your fridge. So some people like a more sour taste, some people like less sour taste. Just taste test after the 3rd day to find your preferred taste. Okay, now all the chilies are sliced. To ferment the chilies, I'm using a glass container like this. This glass container has been rinsed thoroughly and sun-dried. Always make sure that the glass container you are using is thoroughly sun-dried. I would always recommend using a glass container. Do not use a plastic container. Add the sliced chilies into the glass container. Okay, now I have added all the sliced chilies in the glass container. Next, I'm adding in filtered water into the glass container. So ideally the water should be just above the ingredients. For this recipe I used 2 1/4 cups of water. A word about the type of water you should be using in fermentation. Always use filtered water. Try not to use tap water. Tap water contains chlorine, which may inhibit the process of fermentation. So always use filtered water when you are fermenting. And now into this I'm adding in 2 tablespoons pink Himalayan salt, and with a tight lid I'm covering it tightly, and then I'm shaking the bottle so that the salt is mixed in thoroughly. Once nicely mixed, I would prefer to keep something heavy on top of the sliced chilies so that it will stay submerged in the salt water. If the chilies come above the salt water, it will get fungus or mold on them. So to prevent that, you need to make sure that it is in an anaerobic state, that is, it is immersed in the water or brine, which is actually the salt solution. So when I added salt to the water, it became the salt solution or brine. Now to keep this underneath the water, you can use some form of weight. These days you can use fermentation weights which are available online. I like to use a small stone, a flat stone like this, to keep everything submerged in the water. So I'm placing a stone And once I placed the stone, you can see that everything is submerged in the water or brine or salt solution. You may also notice the seeds of the chilies floating. I like to remove them with a small spoon. So I'm just taking a teaspoon and removing the seeds floating around. Okay, now I have removed the seeds on top. Everything is submerged in the water. You may notice one chili slice floating on top. Just make sure that everything is submerged in the water and nothing is floating around. We don't want any floaters in the fermentation. I'm just taking away this chili slice and cover it with the lid. I personally do not close it tightly. We need the wild airborne yeast to help with the fermentation. The wild airborne yeast along with the yeast and bacteria on the skin of the chilies are much needed in the fermentation process. So I'm going to keep this at room temperature for 3 to 5 days or until it has reached to my tangy and sour taste. And now my lacto fermented jalapeno chilies are bottled. So I'm going to allow it to stay at room temperature for 3 to 5 days. I always like to label fermented foods so that I can be sure when I made them. Since I will be keeping them in the refrigerator for some months, I always prefer to label them. Labeling helps me to know when I made the fermented chilies. So always make sure that you label the fermented products. It's the 4th day of fermentation. So that is, it is day 4 after I added everything into this bottle. Now let me just open the lid. I'm going to remove the stone which I have kept, and as I'm removing you can see the bubbles which is happening in the jar. That shows the fermentation has happened and it is now ready to use. I hope you can see the bubbles which came here. So that is how you can know that fermentation happened. And now my jalapeno peppers are ready to use. So this is probiotic rich and gut friendly pickled or fermented or lacto fermented jalapenos. You can use them in salads, chutneys, etc. Just 1 or 2 slices of this jalapeno pepper is ideal in salads or in chutneys or in whatever way you want to use them, you can use. But if you reheat them, the gut friendly healthy bacteria will die off. So ideally it should not be reheated. You should mix it into cold ingredients to get the maximum benefit out of this fermented jalapenos. You can also do the same process with any local variety of green chilies which you can get at hand. Any green chilies or red chilies, fresh green chilies which you can easily source locally. Another thing to notice about fermentation is that the brine or the water, which is the fermented salted water, will have a tartness or a slight sour taste to it. So usually to know whether the fermentation is to your liking, you just take a small portion of the brine and taste test it. So once you feel that it is to your sour liking, you can stop the fermentation process, or rather slow down the fermentation process by keeping it to the refrigerator. Once you move it to the refrigerator, the yeast and bacteria will go into the slumber mode and the fermentation really slows down. Hence, this will keep good for up to a year, sometimes even more than 1 year. All you need to look for is that there are no molds or fungus on top. If there are molds or any fungus growing on top, then you will need to discard the whole batch. Always use clean and dry spoons when you are handling the fermented ingredients. Also, make sure your hands are clean. So now my fermented jalapenos are ready to transfer to the refrigerator. So fermentation is actually something which you can get a hang of by just doing more fermentation, experimenting, watching the signs. So you need to really watch out for the subtle signs which I mentioned in the video. Fermentation is a big wide world, so only through experience you can understand more about all this. So try to start slowly. I have already shared a sauerkraut recipe. That is one of the most easiest method of fermentation. Try to start with sauerkraut and slowly you can learn more about fermentation, at least through my videos, in no time. So start slowly, do in small batches. So that's all I can teach you in this video. I'll be sharing more fermented recipes. Do keep watching, and I'll be sharing how you can use fermented ingredients in recipes. So guys, do try this fermented jalapenos and let me know in the comments how it turned out. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care. Bye bye.